Hi, my name is Matt Vincent, and I am the Senior Visual Communications Specialist at OneBridge. So, why do we need to tell stories with our data? If you're thinking of stories in the traditional sense, you might be thinking that's something that's made up and it's not based on anything factual, and you see your data as sort of a cold, hard facts. And how can those two things come together? It's kind of like oil and water. But what I'd rather have you think about is a reverse Mad Lib. So in a traditional Mad Lib, you have a story and then there's missing nouns, there's missing adjectives, there's missing verbs. Well, your data is the nouns, the verbs, and the adjectives, sort of the cold, hard truth. And now story allows us to put them in a context and a framework, because data by itself can't tell a story. The next thing I want to talk about is the science of stories, how they impact us and how we're kind of hardwired to take in our information via story. So first of all, when we're listening to a story, our brains are engaged on the intuitive level, the emotional level, the rational level, and the somatic level. Also, stories move us to feel. They get us to move away from more critical thinking, analytical thinking, and to more empathetic and positive thinking. Finally, studies have shown that when we're listening to stories, we are more engaged and moved to act. So, as you can see, stories can help our data not only tell the story that is there, but also to engage our audience in a compelling way so that they stick with us through everything the data wants to tell us. So, how do we tell stories with our data? First, I just want to talk about some very basic elements of storytelling that really help when figuring out how to use our data to tell a story. First is what's called the Storybrand framework by Donald Miller. He borrows this framework from Joseph Campbell, who wrote a book called The Hero's Journey. So you start with a hero. They have some problem or obstacle or villain to overcome. They meet a guide who then provides them with either the tools or the training that they need and a clear call to action on what they need to do in order to overcome their problem or obstacle or villain that they're facing. As you can tell, as we talk through that Storybrand framework, there are two primary characters of every good story. You have the hero and you have the guide. Now, by default, all of us are geared to think of ourselves as the hero. But when telling a story with data, you need to think of your audience as the hero and yourself as the guide. If you mix that up, if you communicate the data and the story with yourself as the central figure, you will be in direct competition with your audience. And that is a big no-no when it comes to telling a compelling story with data. Now, the second thing you need to do is to develop your big idea. Now, your big idea is what the data is pointing to. So in another great book by Nancy Duarte called DataStory, she describes this as the data point of view. Your data point of view is comprised of two parts. The first thing is your unique recommendation and sort of what is required. So the data is pointing to something and you want to tell them what exactly it's pointing to. Then the second thing is you need to also show what is at stake. So I'm just going to draw on Star Wars to help us think through this. You know, in the story, the rebels discover a weakness or a flaw in the Death Star. And they decide that if they can attack this weakness, they can destroy the Death Star. But without the stakes in the story, the recommendation of destroying the Death Star would lose its punch. You would lose the engagement that your audience could have. So it's very important to include the stakes when providing your recommendation in your unique data point of view. Your data point of view also needs to be a complete and concise sentence. It's really easy when we have all this data in front of us and all this information that we want to share to sort of drown our audience in information. Instead, we want to find a really clear and concise way to express what our recommendation is and what is at stake. Another important thing when thinking through your data point of view is what verb are you going to use? When we think about a call to action, the key word is action, something that you want the audience to do. There are three primary categories of verbs that we can think of when crafting a data story. We can ask the audience to change what they're doing. we can ask the audience to continue what they're doing, or we can ask the audience to finish what they're doing. So change is something that you want, some transformation that you want to take place for your audience. Maybe you've already asked your audience to change, and this executive summary or this second stage of a process, you want to ask your audience to continue to do something. Or, unfortunately, sometimes you've tried something new, you've asked your audience to change, you've started moving in a direction, and maybe the environment has changed, maybe the circumstances have changed. Now you need your audience to turn around, to finish what they were doing, and to start in a new direction. So change, continue, or finish. Pick one of those three categories as the primary verb that you want to work with when building your data point of view. Now, we've talked about the hero's journey. When we craft the data point of view specifically, another story vehicle that we can use is what's considered a 3-act structure. Now, this is a pretty popular storytelling device, breaking the story up into 3 main parts. So the first would be the situation. That is where our hero finds themselves. So when crafting your data point of view in your summary, you want to get everyone up to speed and make sure everyone is on the same page. So that when we get to Act 2, sort of the complication or the climax, we can sort of start to begin to establish, this is the problem, this is what we need to overcome, this is what's at stake, and these are the things that we need to do. We want to express sort of clear direction and call to action in that, what we call the messy middle or the complication in the middle. Then finally you have the resolution. So you need to paint a picture of what it's going to look like if your audience goes through those things. If they move from their situation into the complication, the messy middle, what are they going to find on the other end? You need to present that happily ever after with a bit of that, and if you don't follow through with this, we're going to have some sort of tragedy befall us. Those are the important 3 acts that we need to include in any good data point of view. All right, so you have your data point of view, and now you're crafting your data story. You're doing your 3-act structure. So in order to do this, what you need to think of is the structure of your presentation or your document. What is that going to look like? You're going to lead with your data point of view, a clear, concise statement of the situation and how it needs to change based on the data. Then you'll create an executive summary, something that could summarize the entire rest of the presentation in one single slide or one single page of the document that a person could quickly read and understand where the story is and where the story is heading. Then after that, the rest of your executive summary, the rest of your proposal, whatever sort of document you're creating is going to support your data point of view and your summary. So when working on your data story, your summary, or your presentation, it does not need to be exhaustive. Take your audience into account and think about what they need to know and what their level of expertise is. So to take it back to Star Wars, think of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker. When Obi-Wan Kenobi wanted to invite Luke Skywalker on the adventure, he didn't get into midichlorian counts or kyber crystals, how to build his own lightsaber. What he did was he succinctly summarized that the Jedi are a noble group of warriors who promote peace and justice throughout the galaxy. That was all Luke needed to get started on his journey. Any more probably would have led to paralysis as opposed to being compelled to action. So, in short, just keep it simple. At OneBridge, our desire is to help you get your data to a place where you can start telling these clear and compelling stories with your data to your audience. So when you're ready to start telling those stories, we're here to be your guide. Thanks for listening and have a good day.